Hi, I'm Silas, and I guess you could say I grew up learning how to stay quiet, how to sit by the door while everyone else laughed at the table. They thought I was gone for good. But when they tracked me down after all these years, pretending it was love, masking it as family, I knew what they really came for. So I showed up, broke, invisible. They didn't recognize me, not as the brother they abandoned, and definitely not as the man who could buy the building we were standing in. The worst part? It wasn't the lies they told. It was how quickly they believed I had no worth without a dollar to my name. But I had one last thing they never saw coming. And by the time they did, it was already too late. What happens when the one left outside finally holds the key to the door? The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that feels heavier than it should. My name, Mr. Silas Quaid, was printed in the familiar, looping cursive I hadn't seen since I left home 20 years ago. No return address, just a Portland postmark and the faint scent of lavender soap. Marjorie always loved the kind that came in fancy gift boxes. I stood by the kitchen window, turning it over in my hands, half expecting it to vanish if I stared too long. Inside, the letter was short and stiff. No warmth, no apology. Dinner at Langston's, Friday evening, 7:30, family only. It's been too long. That was it. No, we miss you. No, hope you're well. Just a summons dressed up as an invitation. I read it twice before setting it down beside the sink. The words felt formal, almost corporate, like something written by an assistant rather than a sister. I leaned against the counter and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. 20 years is a long time to go without hearing your own name from your family's lips. I wondered if blood really forgives time or just pretends to when it's convenient. By sunset, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to that dinner for reconciliation or nostalgia. I wanted to see how they'd treat me now when they thought I had nothing left to offer. I'd sold my company years ago, invested quietly, built a small foundation in other people's names. No one in my family knew. To them, I was still the failure who walked away with a duffel bag and a stubborn pride. So I made a plan. I'd take my old Ford pickup, the one with the dented door and the rust creeping up the tailgate. I'd wear the same brown jacket I'd kept from my days teaching at the community college. No designer labels, no hints of wealth. I'd show up as the version of myself they remembered, just to see if anything had changed. That night, as I folded the letter and slipped it into my jacket pocket, I thought of the last time I'd seen Marjorie. We'd been standing in the driveway of our parents' house, rain soaking through my shirt while she sat dry inside her car. "You've always been the embarrassment, Silas," she'd said. "You never fit. You never will." Then the car pulled away, taillights disappearing down the hill, leaving me with the echo of tires on wet pavement. Maybe that's why I'd stayed away for so long. Not because I wanted to, but because I'd finally learned that silence hurts less than pretending you belong. Friday came too quickly. Portland's autumn air carried that crisp, sharp scent of pine and wet asphalt. Langston's was the kind of restaurant that tried to look casual, but charged enough to make you sit up straighter. I parked 2 blocks away, giving myself time to breathe. The streetlights flickered on as I walked, each step slower than the last. Through the glass, I spotted them before they saw me. Marjorie in a navy blazer, her husband gesturing too broadly as he spoke. Nora, now 17, scrolling her phone. 2 cousins I barely recognized. Laughter drifted through the door, soft and private, like I was eavesdropping on a life I'd forfeited. When I stepped inside, the air changed. Not dramatically. No one gasped or dropped a fork. But there was a subtle pause, a dip in conversation. Marjorie looked up first. Her smile arrived too fast, too bright. "Silas, you came," she said, voice trembling with forced excitement. I nodded, offering a polite smile. "Wouldn't miss it," I lied. A young waitress appeared beside me, blonde hair tied back, name tag reading Anya. "Mr. Quaid, right this way." Her voice was kind, soft in a way that felt out of place. She led me to a chair near the door, just far enough that I had to turn slightly to see the rest of the table. "It'll be easier if you sit here," Marjorie said, still smiling. "So you can come and go as you please." "Sure," I replied. The polite distance was familiar. It was the same kind of kindness people offer when they've already decided where you belong. I watched them between bites of salad, each gesture a performance I'd seen before. The careful laughter, the way my sister adjusted her napkin when someone mentioned family. Nora barely looked up from her phone. My cousin Dana kept refilling Marjorie's glass as if she were auditioning for gratitude. When the waiter passed, I caught a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear. "He's doing his best, I suppose," Marjorie murmured. The words slid under my skin, cold and clean like a blade. I forced a small smile and kept eating. Halfway through the meal, Anya returned to clear my plate. She paused, folding my napkin neatly before setting it beside my water glass. "They always seat guests by the door," she said, eyes sympathetic. "But at least you get the breeze." I chuckled softly, though the laugh caught in my throat. "Guess I do." The napkin's folded edge pointed toward the exit, a small door shape. I didn't think much of it then, but later I'd remember that gesture, that tiny kindness amid all the polite cruelty. As dessert arrived, Marjorie raised her glass. "To family," she said, voice clear and strong. "To those who stayed loyal." The table echoed her words with cheerful agreement. I sat perfectly still, fingers tightening around my water glass. The sound of their laughter faded to a low hum, like the ocean before a storm. That's when I realized the test had only just begun. I lifted my glass with the others, but didn't drink. My fingers curled around the stem just enough to fake engagement. Marjorie's voice cut through the ambient clatter of cutlery and muffled conversation, too polished to be spontaneous. "To family, those who stayed loyal," she'd said. Her smile held steady, but I saw it for what it was. That toast wasn't about me. It was about keeping control. She wanted the room to know she held the reins now, that the narrative belonged to her. I didn't miss the way her eyes skipped right past me when she clinked glasses with Paul and Eric, our two older brothers. Neither did they look my way. As the conversation resumed, I let my eyes drift across the table. Everything about this dinner felt choreographed, like a show put on for a guest who wasn't supposed to speak. Plates passed in practiced hands, smiles formed and faded like stage lights. On cue, predictable, safe. And then I saw it. My name tag. S. Quinn. Not Silas Quaid. Not even Silas. Just S. A slip of paper barely larger than a fortune cookie strip, neatly tucked under the water glass, printed in the same clean font as everyone else's. I knew better than to believe it was a typo. It wasn't a mistake. It was an edit. A quiet rewrite of who I was, fitting me into the mold Marjorie needed me to play. The silent one. The outsider who returned without baggage because they'd already emptied it in his absence. Someone across the table, a woman I didn't recognize, maybe a friend of Paul's wife, asked, "So, you're the quiet one of the family, huh?" She laughed softly, as if that label had always belonged to me. I nodded once, polite. Quiet, maybe, but not invisible. She blinked at my answer, unsure how to take it, and turned back to her risotto. I felt a heat rise in my chest that had nothing to do with the food. And yet, I smiled, because I finally saw what this was. They hadn't asked me to dinner to reconnect. They needed a prop to round out the picture, an accessory to their polished image of unity. The memory hit me without warning. I was 16, crouched under the hood of our old station wagon in the driveway. My hands were black with grease, sleeves rolled to my elbows. Eric and Paul stood nearby with their friends, beer bottles in hand, laughing about how I'd never make it out of the garage. Marjorie leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, smirking like she was watching a sitcom. "You know we can just call a mechanic, right?" she called out. "This isn't what smart kids do with their time." But I'd fixed it. Alone. I'd wiped my hands on a rag and turned the engine over with one turn of the key. No one said thanks. They just climbed in and drove off like it had always been expected of me. That same ache sat in my chest now. Not pain exactly. More like a bruise that had never fully healed. "So," Marjorie said, louder this time, pulling me back to the present. "It's nice to see everyone doing well, building stable careers, holding the family name strong." She smiled too sweetly. "Some of us had to work really hard without running off." A ripple of polite laughter moved around the table like an awkward wave. Even Paul chuckled, though he didn't look directly at me. I let the pause linger before I responded. "Sometimes," I said, keeping my tone even, "leaving is the hardest kind of loyalty." That quieted them. Even Marjorie's fork paused midair. It wasn't loud, it wasn't confrontational, but it landed. And for the first time, I saw Nora, seated 2 chairs down, look up from her phone. Her gaze lingered on me, thoughtful, curious. She passed the breadbasket my way, and as I reached for it, she leaned slightly closer. "They don't really know you, do they?" she asked under her breath. I looked at her surprised. Maybe they never wanted to. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. For the first time tonight, I felt seen. Dessert arrived, some complicated mousse in 2 small glasses, and the wine was replaced with flutes of sparkling champagne. I didn't drink, but I accepted the glass out of courtesy. Marjorie stood again. "Before we wrap up," she said, raising her flute, "I just want to say how proud I am of everyone here, for keeping the family's name clean, strong, and alive through everything." Her eyes scanned the table. She named each sibling, Paul, Eric, even their wives. Skipped me entirely. I looked down at the bubbles rising in my glass. Anya, the waitress, lingered at my side just long enough for me to notice. She glanced at my still full glass, then at me. No words exchanged, just a flicker of understanding. I raised my glass quietly. Not high, just enough. "To everyone," I said, "who stayed honest." No one clinked glasses. A few eyes darted toward Marjorie. She smiled, but it had hardened now, edges too sharp to be genuine. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was thick, tangible, as if the room itself had taken a breath and didn't know whether to hold it or let it go. And in that silence, I understood. My little experiment was working, but I wasn't sure I liked what I was uncovering. The silence after that dinner clung to me through the drive home, like damp smoke that wouldn't clear. Even when I reached the cabin, my temporary escape outside Portland, the laughter from the restaurant still echoed faintly in my ears. Morning came gray and wet. The rain tapped against the window like it wanted to be let in. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, my mind still replaying last night in broken fragments. The fake smiles, the skipped name, the way Marjorie's voice tightened when she toasted those who stayed loyal. I wondered if I'd gone too far, or maybe not far enough. The coffee pot hissed in the kitchen. I poured a cup, stepped out onto the porch, and let the mist settle on my face. The forest around the cabin felt silent in that way only early mornings can, like the world hadn't decided what kind of day it was going to be. That's when my phone rang. Her name appeared on the screen. Marjorie Quinn. I hesitated. Then I answered. "Morning," she said, too bright. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No," I replied. "I was just having coffee." "That's good. I just wanted to say, thank you for coming last night. It meant a lot to the family." Her tone was even, careful, like she was balancing on a line between courtesy and control. "I wasn't sure if I'd be welcome," I said. She laughed softly. "Oh, Silas, of course you're welcome. We just wanted to keep things appropriate, that's all. You know, appearances." That word, appropriate, landed like a pebble dropped into cold water. Small, but it rippled. "What exactly does that mean?" I asked. "It means," she said, pausing, "I hope you understand that last night wasn't about money or grudges. We've all moved on, and I think it's best if you, well, maybe not contact certain relatives. It might confuse them." I felt my jaw tighten. "Confuse them how?" "You know how stories spread. It's just easier if we keep everyone on the same page." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't draw blood. I simply ended the call. The soft click felt cleaner than any argument could have. I stood there for a moment, watching the rain slide down the porch rail. Appropriate. Confuse them. She still thought she could script me out of her story. A sound from the driveway broke the thought, a low hum of a van pulling up, a delivery truck. The driver stepped out, holding a brown envelope. "Mr. Quaid?" he asked. "Yeah." "Got something for you. Said it was urgent." He handed it over and left without waiting for a signature. Inside was an invoice from Langston's restaurant, the same place we'd had dinner. My name was printed at the bottom under a note in faint pen. "Unable to pay. Charged to host." At first I almost laughed, but then I looked closer. The total balance, every meal, every drink, the entire table, had already been charged to my own credit card. Somehow, the system had recognized my name from a prior event donation I'd made years ago through the restaurant's charity program. So there it was. My generosity had paid for the whole thing, and they'd turned it into pity. I folded the receipt slowly, breathing through my nose, steady, the same calm I used to get before a storm. I walked outside again, letting the rain hit my hands. I thought back 15 years to when Marjorie's boutique had been sinking. She'd called me then, her voice softer, almost pleading. "Just alone," she'd said. "You're the only one I can trust." I'd wired her $20,000 the next day. She'd promised to repay it within a year. She never mentioned it again. Now the memory felt like a bad joke. I sat down on the porch steps. The wood was damp, but I didn't care. I stared out at the rain-soaked trees and realized something. This wasn't about money, or even forgiveness. This was about erasure. She'd done it before, in smaller ways, rewriting stories, omitting details, shaping the narrative until she was spotless, and I was the cautionary tale. But this time, she'd done it in public. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was clear. Around noon, a small blue sedan pulled up. I recognized the car before I saw her face. Nora stepped out, clutching a scarf, the same one I'd left hanging on the back of my chair at the restaurant. "I thought you might want this back," she said, walking up the steps. "Thanks," I said, taking it. "You didn't have to drive all the way out here." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "They said you made things uncomfortable last night." I smiled faintly. "That's what people say when you stop playing along." Her eyes softened. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you're the only real one in that room." That hit deeper than I expected. I studied her, this kid who had grown up in the same world that had pushed me out, yet still saw through it. "Don't lose that honesty," I told her. "It'll make you lonely sometimes, but never hollow." She nodded, the kind of small nod people give when they don't fully understand yet, but will someday. Then she turned to go. The car disappeared down the road, its sound swallowed by the rain. I went back inside, sat at the small table by the window, and laid out the items before me, the restaurant receipt and the napkin from the dinner. The one Anya had folded into a tiny door. I placed the folded receipt beneath it, pressing down gently. "Let's see what happens when the door swings back," I whispered. Then I opened my laptop. The familiar glow filled the cabin. I clicked through old folders until I found one labeled Family Affairs, Legal Records. A quiet smile formed. They wanted control. They wanted the story told their way. Fine. They would get the truth, on record. I backed out of the driveway slower than usual, the cabin's gravel crunching under the tires. The rain from earlier had turned the road slick, and I let the windshield wipers blur my reflection as I headed into Portland. 2 days after the dinner and the realization that I wasn't looking for approval, I was looking for truth. I pulled into the lot behind Marjorie's boutique cafe around lunch. The sign gleamed with white letters, Quinn & Co's, beneath which smaller text read, "The Quinn Legacy of Generosity." My inbox this morning had already yelled the irony loud enough. A subscription email titled Our Community Impact. I laughed quietly in my truck. I knew that kind of messaging, clean, controlled, age-appropriate for the Sunday social columns. It felt like a headline someone wrote about someone else's life. I stepped into the cafe, the bell over the door jingling politely. The smell of roasted beans and sweet pastry filled the air, but something felt off. The decor was impeccable. Marble countertops, copper pendant lighting, and a wall of framed photos labeled Family Achievements, each one showing Marjorie standing at a ribbon, cutting or holding a check. Then I noticed it. My picture, too. Only my shoulder was visible, cropped so tightly I couldn't make out my face. I remembered being the one behind the car hood, fixing that old station wagon. But here I was, half there. A ghost in the frame. The edit made me cold. My literal erasure. Marjorie stood by the register, greeting customers with the same polished warmth she used to beam at charity galas. When she caught my eye, her voice chirped, "Silas, so wonderful to see you." Her tone fit the scene, like I was another supporter, not her brother. I smiled and answered, "Thanks, felt like time to stop by." She introduced me to a small group of clients and friends. "This is Silas. It's great you could drop in. He helped us with some early projects." The line dripped with implication. He helped. He didn't belong. I nodded, said, "Nice to meet you all. Lovely space here." Inside, I thought, still keeping things appropriate. So I asked aloud, "Still keeping things appropriate?" Her smile froze. The cafe hush thickened for a heartbeat. I ordered a latte, paid at the counter, and left a generous tip. I caught a flash of emotion in Marjorie's eyes, something like shock, or maybe regret, before she masked it. Quiet generosity, uncontrolled narrative. Later, after the customers had left and the staff were tidying up, Marjorie confronted me near the counter. "Why are you here?" she asked. "You think buying coffee makes you relevant?" She crossed her arms. I met her gaze calmly. "No," I said, "but you'd be surprised how much truth a receipt can hold." I slid a sealed envelope under the register. It contained the old loan agreement I'd signed 15 years ago when I helped her salvage her boutique. I never asked for repayment, just kept it in file. Now she could see it. I didn't demand anything. This was a soft warning, the kind that lands harder because it doesn't shout. She looked away, lips tight. The cafe felt smaller. Her image of family and legacy felt flawed for the first time. That evening, I returned to the cabin and sat at the small dining table. It still smelled of the wood sealant I'd applied when I moved in. The napkin, folded into a door shape, sat next to that stained receipt from the restaurant. My father's voice floated back across 2 decades. Kindness without boundaries is just a leash. I always believed silence was safety. Tonight, I realized silence had been my trap. I wanted justice, but on my terms. My phone buzzed. It was Nora. I answered quickly. "Dad, Mom's furious," she whispered. "She said you're trying to humiliate her." I paused. "Maybe humiliation's just honesty in the wrong light," I replied softly. She hesitated, then added, "She's planning something big. A family dinner this weekend to clarify things." I thanked her and ended the call. I unfolded the napkin, spread it flat on the table. I tucked the receipt beneath it. "Let's open the door," I murmured. The trap was set, but I would walk in willingly. The dinner that was meant to silence me would soon become my stage. I slid the formal invitation across my desk without opening it. The card bore Marjorie's name in gold script, "Family Appreciation Dinner." The irony was sharp enough to taste. My father had used the same phrase when he closed the will. I kept the envelope folded and didn't reply. If the invitation meant anything, I would show up on my terms, not hers. Saturday evening arrived with a calm that masked the tension in my chest. I drove to Lake Oswego, the suburban avenue lined with maples that still held green leaves even as September cooled down. The estate was immaculate. White marble floors gleamed under warm lights. The kind of elegance engineered to make trust feel expensive. I parked, stepped out of my old pickup, and walked up the front steps. A soft jazz track escaped the open doors. Inside, the house felt curated for display. Every photo on the walls told a story. Marjorie cutting ribbons, siblings smiling across tables, charity events captured in sequined dresses and handshake poses. One of the photos was my own, but cropped. I recognized the body, the jacket I used to wear when I helped bring her boutique back from the brink. But my face had been edited out. A faint sting pricked my throat, but I square-shouldered it and walked on. I entered a grand living room where 2 brothers, Eric and Paul, were already milling around with their wives and a few family friends. They turned, said polite greetings. My nameplate sat at the end of a long horseshoe table closest to the serving area, not at the head where the rest of them clustered. The positioning repeated the pattern from our previous dinner, the seat by the door. I noticed Anya, the young woman who had served at the restaurant, now working as part of the catering team. Her eyes met mine, brief but knowing. She leaned in and whispered, "You again. Always by the door." Her voice was quiet, but the meaning was loud. I answered softly, "Maybe that's where truth gets a breeze." Dinner started with cocktail hour and formal mingling. Guests swapped smiles that looked like they'd been measured in a mirror. I moved through the room, shaking hands, nodding at compliments about my work overseas that no longer belonged to this family's history. Small talk turned to toasts. Marjorie stood near the end of the table and tapped her glass, commanding attention. "To our legacy," she said, voice strong. "To the people who kept this family respectable through change, through challenge." Her eyes panned across the group, lingering deliberately at each sibling. When she passed my station, she paused and moved on without nodding at me. I rose when dessert was served and spoke in a calm voice they weren't expecting. "Legacy is a lovely idea, but tonight I brought something to add to it." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. Without a word, I placed it at the edge of the table, letting it slide into the midst of the group. Heads turned, mouths paused mid-conversation. I sat back down and waited. The envelope contained a loan agreement I'd signed years before. When Marjorie's boutique struggled, I had helped her out of loyalty, never asked for thanks, never demanded public credit. Now she had chosen to rewrite that history. My quiet act became baggage she hid under champagne and accolades. Marjorie's smile froze. Eric cleared his throat. Paul's wife nudged him. A hush settled like dust that hadn't been swept. My heart wasn't racing. It was still. I'd learned long ago that calm is louder than yelling. I listened to the small sounds, a fork set down, a breath held, the quick glance at the envelope. Marjorie spoke finally. "You never change, Silas," she said, tone cold. "Always trying to make a scene." I answered gently, "No scene, just a reflection." Her face reddened, but the words landed. The guests shifted, unsure what to say next. The buffet replaced the conversation. People excused themselves. The dinner was over without dessert. My nameplate lay untouched. I stood, walked to the serving area, gathered my jacket and coat, and nodded quietly at Anya. She smiled, an understanding, not a greeting. Outside, I stepped into the crisp night air. Through the window, I saw Marjorie arguing with her husband. Her polished mask cracked. I felt no triumph, only sadness that the person I thought my sister once was had become the mask she wore more than the woman beneath. As I walked to my truck, my phone buzzed. I slipped it out, a message from Nora. "She's furious. She's planning to expose you. Please be careful." I looked up at the sky, clouds drifting as if ignoring the stars. "Let her try," I whispered. The gathering that was meant to silence me had become the stage where they first saw the truth. "Let her try," I whispered. The night swallowed the words, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel cornered. I drove back to the cabin with the windows down, the chill air cutting through the lingering heat of confrontation. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew Marjorie wouldn't let last night fade quietly. For people like her, silence isn't peace, it's plotting time. 2 mornings later, I found out how right I was. My phone started buzzing just after sunrise. Dozens of notifications piled up, one after another. I rubbed my eyes, scrolled through, and there it was. Silas Quaid, the man who exploited his own family. My name was trending locally. A post, shared across multiple community pages, claimed I'd pretended to be generous and had manipulated family hardships for sympathy. Attached were photos from the dinner, carefully cropped shots showing me standing, speaking, my face caught mid-expression. The captions painted me as ungrateful, vindictive, self-centered. I didn't need to read the name of the poster to know who had done it. The wording was too precise, too respectable. It reeked of Marjorie. Within hours, emails trickled in from old colleagues, polite, distancing notes, a few partnerships, reassessing commitments. It was efficient damage control, the kind she'd mastered. Elegant destruction disguised as clarifying the record. I sat at the kitchen table, the morning light thin through the mist outside, and let myself breathe through the sting. It wasn't the humiliation that hurt, it was the familiarity, being erased again. I made one call, to Martin Hale, my attorney, and the closest thing I had to an ally who didn't need explanations. He met me at his downtown office that afternoon, his usual calm expression shadowed with concern. "This thing's blowing up fast, Silas. The posts are spreading, and a few outlets are sniffing around. You should sue for defamation." I shook my head. "Not yet." He frowned. "Not yet? You're just going to let her ruin you publicly?" I looked at him. "No, I'm going to let her believe she already has." Martin leaned back, studying me. "You've got that look again, the one from 15 years ago, the week before you walked away from all of this." I pulled a folder from my coat pocket and set it on his desk. "This isn't a lawsuit, not yet. Just documentation." He opened it, scanned the pages, and his eyebrows rose. "Charity misallocations? You traced this?" "Every cent," I said quietly. "Funds from her boutique's foundation, donations meant for community scholarships, diverted to personal accounts. Same legacy of generosity she's bragging about online." He exhaled. "You've been sitting on this." "I wasn't looking to destroy her," I said. "I just wanted peace." "Then what are you looking for now?" he asked. "Truth. And I'm done asking permission to tell it." When I left his office, the afternoon sun had already dipped behind the city skyline. The streets shimmered from a light rain. I walked past cafe windows where strangers scrolled through the same feeds that carried my name like a rumor. It didn't matter. Rumors can't live long when the truth walks into the room. Back at the cabin, the quiet greeted me like an old friend. I opened my laptop again, this time not to defend myself, but to read. Comment after comment painted me as a fraud, a failed man, an opportunist. I read them all, slowly, deliberately. Then I closed the screen and whispered, "You can't shame someone who's already been stripped bare." I reached for the napkin, the same one Anya had folded into a tiny door. The creases were worn now, soft from handling. I unfolded it fully and placed it beneath a new document I'd printed that morning, titled Legacy Restoration. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning clarity. The sound of tires on gravel broke the silence outside. I turned and saw Nora's car pull up. She stepped out hesitantly, her shoulders hunched against the drizzle. When I opened the door, her eyes were already red. "I didn't know she'd do that," she said, voice trembling. "Mom made me tell her things, stories about you. She said it was just for context." I gestured for her to sit. "And now?" "She twisted everything, made you sound like you were using us." I nodded slowly. "That's her way. Truth with makeup on." Nora shook her head. "I'm sorry, Uncle Silas. I shouldn't have said anything." I smiled faintly. "You don't owe me silence, Nora. You owe yourself truth. Don't carry her weight. It's heavier than it looks." She looked up at me, guilt and something like hope flickering behind her tears. "What are you going to do now?" I leaned back in the chair, thinking. "I'm going to finish what she started, but on my terms." Her brows knitted. "How?" "By giving her the one thing she's always wanted." "What's that?" "An audience." I told her what I wanted her to do. "You'll help me send invitations for one last dinner, under my name this time. Her eyes widened. You're inviting them all again, after what she did? Yes, I said. She used lies in public. I'll use truth in daylight. The difference is, I don't need to humiliate her, to be honest. That evening, after she left, I sat back down at my desk. The rain had stopped, leaving a hush over the forest outside. I drafted the invitations carefully, each word deliberate. Family gathering, hosted by Silas Quaid. Transparency dinner. Come hungry for honesty. I sent them one by one, every sibling, every cousin, every family friend who had watched from the sidelines. And then, for good measure, I posted a public notice on the same platform Marjorie had used to smear me. I didn't check for reactions. I just turned off the laptop, the screen dimming to black. In the window's reflection, my face looked calm, but my eyes burned with something older than anger. Purpose. This time, I whispered, they'll remember who sat by the door. And now, I watched them arrive, one by one, through the tinted windows of the event hall I'd rented downtown. It was early evening, and Portland's skyline cast long shadows over the glass facade. The room behind me glowed warm but quiet, dressed simply. No extravagant centerpieces, no jazz quartet, just a modest buffet and 30 seats wrapped in white linen. I adjusted my tie, navy blue, plain, not meant to impress, just enough to say I belonged because I always had, even when they pretended otherwise. As the first guest stepped in, I greeted each with the kind of warmth they had once reserved only for each other. No sarcasm, no edge, just even polite tones. The same tones they'd used at the first dinner, when I was more furniture than family. They smiled cautiously, unsure of the tone tonight. That was by design. The hall's lighting was soft, but the air was heavier than before. A tension sat between each clink of a water glass and whispered question. Every place setting had a name card, and beneath each name, a printed quote. Silence is never neutral. They read it, glanced around, then tucked the cards under their plates like something shameful. Anya was there again, this time leading a small catering crew. Her presence wasn't accidental. She caught my eye as she passed and gave a subtle nod, recognizing what this evening was. A mirror. Dinner was served quickly. Simple dishes, nothing lavish. There was less talking than usual. Even the ones who'd come out of obligation rather than curiosity knew something was brewing. And when the last fork settled on a plate, I stood. I want to thank you for coming, I said evenly. I know this wasn't expected, but then again, neither was what came after last week. I gestured to the screen behind me where a slideshow began. Photos, documents, dates, nothing dramatic. Just facts, bank statements, screenshots, a charity's donation report cross-checked with boutique expense ledgers, transfers labeled community grant rerouted into private accounts, gasps, murmurs. One cousin's hand shot up to her mouth. Another's eyes darted to Marjorie. I didn't raise my voice. I let the screen speak. This isn't about revenge, I said. It's about clarity, about what we pretend not to see. Some of you already knew this. Others never asked, but pretending has a cost. I paused on one slide. Her name, her digital signature. No edits, no exaggeration. Marjorie stood, her face flushed, but her expression trained. This is manipulated, she said, her voice trembling. You're twisting everything, like you always do. I didn't reply. I clicked one more slide, an internal email from her to an accountant, clearly detailing a planned rerouting. Someone whispered, that's her email address. Even her husband, always silent, always composed, lowered his eyes. Nora sat 2 seats down, quietly crying. Not the shocked kind of crying. The kind that comes from relief. The kind that says, finally, someone said it out loud. I turned to face them all. All I ever asked was to be treated like family. Not an embarrassment to manage. Not a mistake to keep by the door. The room stayed still. I know some of you believed the posts. I know some of you helped write them. I'm not here to ask for apologies. I'm here to stop pretending. Because pretending is a lonely way to live. Silence fell. The kind that lingers because no one knows what's safe to say next. I stepped away from the table. You don't have to believe me. Just read what's in front of you. That's enough. I walked toward the doors. Behind me, I heard Marjorie's voice rise, trying to retake control, but no one echoed her. Outside, soft rain had started falling, the city lights hazy through the mist. I exhaled slowly, feeling no triumph, just the stillness that comes when weight is finally set down. Uncle Silas, I turned. Nora ran up, her coat barely on, hair already damp. Are you okay? She asked, breathless. I looked at her. For the first time in 20 years. Behind her, the noise in the hall grew louder, chairs scraping, voices clashing. The facade was cracking from within. Anya stepped out quietly, shielding a folded napkin from the rain. She handed it to me. It survived, she said gently. I looked at the napkin, the one shaped like a door, now worn and softened at the folds. So did I whispered. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, a journalist. Mr. Quaid, would you like to give a statement? I looked at the napkin, then up at the sky, the clouds parting just enough to reveal a sliver of stars. Tell them, I said. I finally sat where I belonged. Then I hung up the phone, placed it face down on the counter, and let the quiet take me. Outside the window, dawn was beginning to settle in across the lake. A silver fog clung low over the water. The reflection of the trees shimmered with every ripple. In that moment, I felt no pride, just stillness. The scent of burnt coffee drifted through the cabin. I had forgotten to turn off the machine the night before. I didn't care. My phone buzzed again, another and another. Messages stacked like impatient questions. Journalists wanting quotes, family members defending their silence, and strangers passing judgment like they'd sat at that table themselves. I silenced it without reading a word. On the old TV in the corner, I turned on the morning news, more out of habit than curiosity. There it was, top story. Quinn family scandal, charitable funds misused, sources say. I stood there watching my last name crawl across the screen like it belonged to someone else. They showed clips from the event, no faces, no direct statements, just the facts, clean and cold. And then the anchor added, according to anonymous sources close to the family, the documents were not leaked by Mr. Silas Quaid himself, but someone within the Quinn circle. I didn't move. I just closed my eyes for a breath. I didn't need to guess. I knew. An hour later, a knock at the door. Not forceful, not timid. Familiar. When I opened it, Nora stood there, dark circles under her eyes, her jacket damp at the shoulders from the lingering rain. She didn't ask to come in. She just stepped across the threshold like she used to, before everything got twisted. She's gone, she said. Marjorie? She left the house last night. No one knows where. She shut off her phone. Even her assistant doesn't know. I nodded, then motioned toward the kitchen. I poured us both coffee. This time, I made sure it wasn't burned. She took the mug, both hands around it like she was holding something fragile. She won't forgive you, she said. I didn't need her forgiveness, I answered. Just the truth in the room. She didn't say anything for a while. The cabin crackled with the quiet. After a few sips, she asked, "So what happens now?" I looked at her and said, "We rebuild, but not what they had. Something real." She didn't smile, but her shoulders relaxed, and that was enough. Later that afternoon, Martin Hale pulled into the gravel drive, stepping out with a large manila envelope in hand. He looked more tired than usual, like he'd read too many legal statements and too few truths lately. "This came for you," he said, handing it over. "From Marjorie." I opened it carefully. Inside, a handwritten letter, her cursive slanted and sharp. "You've always wanted to prove you were better than us. Congratulations. Now you are." Beneath it, a torn photograph. One of the whole family, taken maybe 20 years ago at some long-forgotten Thanksgiving. Her tear cut through most of it, but my face was left intact. Not an accident. A message. I folded the letter, not with anger, but with a tired kind of understanding. "She's wrong," I said to Martin. "I never wanted to be better. Just equal." I walked over to the old wooden shelf by the fireplace, took the napkin out, creased and soft from time, still bearing the imprint of the words "reserved" from that first dinner. I placed it beside the photo, two broken things from two broken tables. By early evening, Nora and I found ourselves sitting in a small cafe near downtown. No marble counters, no reserved signs, no grand entrance, just the smell of warm pastries and the clink of real ceramic cups. It was the kind of place where no one knew who we were, or cared. She stirred her drink slowly, then looked up. "Would you ever go back to them?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched a couple outside wave to their friend across the street, a natural kind of warmth. No performance. "Maybe one day," I said finally, "but only if the door opens from both sides." Nora nodded once, quietly. Back at the cabin that night, I sat by the fireplace. The room was lit only by the soft glow of the flames. I took out the letter one last time, read it again, slower, then placed it in the fire. I didn't watch it curl and blacken. I turned to the napkin instead. Some scars deserve light. Some reminders need to be kept, not as pain, but as proof. I didn't feel vindicated, not even victorious, just whole. My eyes closed slowly. For the first time in years, my body felt like it could rest without bracing for impact. Then the phone rang. I let it buzz twice, unsure. I picked it up on the third. "Hello?" A woman's voice, soft but steady, came through the line. "You don't know me," she said, "but I knew your father. He left something for you." I opened my eyes again, not wide, not startled, just awake. The voice from last night still echoed faintly in my head. "He left something for you." The words had settled into my bones, tugging me out of sleep before dawn. 3 weeks had passed since the transparency dinner, yet peace still felt like a borrowed coat. Comfortable, but not quite mine. Now I was driving along a narrow rural road outside Portland, the world wrapped in fog. The windshield wipers kept a slow rhythm, clearing streaks of mist as I followed the directions the woman, Evelyn Cross, had given me. She hadn't said much on the phone, only that she was keeping a promise. The napkin sat folded neatly in my jacket pocket, edges pressed flat as if I'd been guarding it all my life. I ran my fingers over it while driving. The creases had softened, but it still held its shape. The door. "Let's see what's left to find," I murmured. When I reached the cemetery, The sun was barely rising, painting the fog in pale gold. It wasn't large, just a patch of fenced earth with crooked stones and fallen leaves carpeting the ground. Evelyn was already there, standing by a bench near the entrance. She was older than I expected. Her gray hair was tied back, her coat simple but clean. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that came from recognition, not introduction. "You're Silas," she said softly. "I can see it." I nodded, stepping closer. "You said you knew my father." "I did," she replied. "I was his nurse the last few years. He wasn't an easy man, but he was thoughtful, especially about you." From her bag, she pulled out a small wooden box, its hinges worn smooth. She placed it carefully in my hands. "He asked me to keep this," she said. "Said I'd know when the right person came for it." His words were, "Give it to the one who comes for truth, not inheritance." Inside, I found a pocket watch, a faded photograph, and a letter sealed with his old wax stamp. The photo caught me off guard. My father sat in his chair by the window, stern, composed. And beside him, a younger me, maybe 10 years old, looking away from the camera. Everyone else in the background was smiling. Everyone but me. I swallowed hard. He remembered this picture. Evelyn nodded. He kept it by his bedside. Said it reminded him of the only one who ever looked at life the way he did. I broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shaky, but strong. "My son, I made mistakes. I let others tell me who you were, and I believed them. I thought silence was protection, not distance. I was wrong. You were always the one I was proudest of. The one who understood that wealth isn't what we own, but what we hold sacred. I wish I'd told you sooner. Forgive me if you can. If not, just know I saw you, even when no one else did." I read it twice, my voice cracking halfway through. Evelyn stayed quiet, giving me space. For years, I had carried the weight of being unseen, trying to earn my family's approval, trying to prove I belonged. And now, the man I thought had turned away had been reaching out all along. His words buried, intercepted, stolen by those who claimed to love both of us. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. "Did he send me other letters?" I asked quietly. Evelyn's eyes lowered. "He tried, but your sister made sure none left the house. Said it would confuse the family. I'm sorry." A hollow laugh slipped from me, half grief, half relief. "That sounds like her." Evelyn placed a hand on my arm. "You have his eyes, you know. Kind but guarded. He'd be glad you came." I thanked her and watched as she walked away through the fog, her figure fading like a memory. Minutes later, the sound of a car engine pulled me back. Nora's old sedan came into view. She stepped out, wrapped in a thick coat, her breath visible in the cold. "I figured you'd be here," she said, catching her breath. "I tracked your car through your assistant." I smiled faintly. "Persistent, like your mother." She didn't smile. "I found her." My chest tightened. "Marjorie." "She's quiet. She wants to talk." I looked back at my father's grave. "Not yet." Nora nodded slowly. "I understand." She knelt beside me and looked at the wooden box. "Is that from him?" "Yes." "Do you want to keep it?" I shook my head and handed her the pocket watch. "You keep it. Maybe one day you'll pass it to someone who listens." She closed her fingers around it, eyes glistening. "I will." As the sun began to cut through the clouds, I stood and reached into my coat. I pulled out the napkin, that same symbol of every table I'd ever been pushed to the edge of. and laid it gently across the gravestone. There was a faint stain still visible on one corner, from the wine spilled the night I first came back home. "You always kept a seat for me," I whispered. "It just took me a lifetime to find it." The wind caught the edge of the napkin, fluttering it softly. For a second, it looked like a door opening, just slightly, enough for light to pass through. Weeks later, Nora came to visit me at the cabin. It had changed since she last saw it. The porch repainted, a new sign hanging by the path. She read it aloud. "The Door House, a place for second chances." "Community retreat," I said, "for kids who grew up like I did, outside looking in." She smiled, the first real one I'd seen on her. "You finally opened the door." "Yeah," I said, gazing out at the lake shimmering in the morning light. "And this time, no one sits alone by it." She asked softly, "Do you miss them?" "Sometimes," I answered, "but missing isn't the same as needing." She nodded, understanding. I watched her drive away, her car trailing a thin ribbon of dust down the gravel road. Then I turned back, toward the porch, where the brass plaque glinted in the sunlight. The air felt lighter now, as if the past had loosened its grip. I took one last look at the water, still, reflective, endless. And in that quiet, I heard my father's voice again, not scolding, not distant, just proud. "I thought I tested them that night," I whispered, almost smiling. "But maybe life was testing me, to see if I could be kind, even when the world wasn't." The lake shimmered brighter, sunlight breaking fully through the clouds.